Alright, guys, you're gonna have to forgive me, but I am a history nerd, and I do have to go over some of this stuff. So, honestly, I don't believe there was any actual witchcraft in Salem, regardless of whether or not you can see Giles Corey's ghost. When I was doing more research for this, what struck me as interesting was a few things. So, for one thing, this is in Salem Village, not the city of Salem, which is ironic because the city of Salem now kind of openly embraces the witch iconography. Just to give you kind of an idea, Salem Village is actually not the norm for a lot of New England towns at this time. Admittedly, while we do like to say a lot of our settlers came here for religious freedom, it meant religious freedom for their own particular denomination or sect of their faith. They were not particularly fond of letting other people practice their religion, which is why states like Connecticut and New Hampshire got settled. I love New Hampshire, but frankly, it was founded based on colonists that the colony of Massachusetts didn't want to take at the time, which is fine by me because New Hampshire is free and badass. But the reason I bring it up is the careers of the men involved in these witch trials. So, sorry, a little bit more exposition, actually, before I get into that. So Salem Village was actually pretty divided. They were almost viewed as very fanatical in their religious beliefs. In fact, it wouldn't be too out of the realm of unreasonable to suggest that a lot of these people were seen as kind of like how we see the Taliban. A bit extreme, fanatical in their faith, yeah. However, they didn't have an actual church set up at this point. They would do some services in the town meeting house, but if you wanted to go to an actual church, you had to go 5 miles out of town to actually do that. And one family in particular, the Putnams, wanted to build a church in Salem. If I remember correctly, I'd say the eastern half of the village was for building the church, while the western half was afraid it would raise property taxes too much, and they did not want to build it. This is interesting because the majority of the accused lived on the west side that didn't want to build the church, while the accusers were mostly from the east side of the village and were usually and somehow in bed with the Putnams. So again, this is the family or the father of Anne Putnam, who was one of the girls who first made the accusations. Samuel Parris is the first person in this I kind of started doing some research on. As I previously said, he did inherit a sugarcane plantation, and he wasn't bad, he wasn't poor. He wasn't unwell off, but I'm sure farmers can tell you one bad season is enough to put you in debt, put you in danger in some way, shape, or form, whether it be financially or just in terms of if you're growing food, just what kind of food you can produce. And while he absolutely used the money and all that he got from the plantation, he wanted a more stable form of paycheck. And that's the real reason he started looking at the church. Yes, he had been a member of the church and all that, and his father raised him that way. But his desire to become a reverend was more financially motivated. He thought it would be a more stable financial position. The problem was nobody anywhere wanted to minister to Salem Village. The main reason being is the minister's salary, the reverend's salary was paid by church dues, and this was the main reason a lot of the other members of the other reverends had quit was because people of Salem wouldn't pay their dues. In fact, one of the accused I mentioned, what was his name? George Burroughs. He, interestingly enough, at one point had actually owed the Putnams money, and they took him to debtor's court, which is a much bigger deal being in debt than it is now. As much as being in debt now sucks, you didn't get your credit score ruined back then. You went to debtor's prison. However, he was acquitted because he argued that when he borrowed the money, he was the minister of Salem, and he couldn't pay them back until the members paid him the dues that were owed him. So essentially he argued, well, I can't pay back my debt because other people are in debt to me and owe me money that I'm going to pay to the Putnams. And so he was acquitted. There is actually some speculation that that's part of the reason he was accused, because he made the Putnams look bad in court. There was a lot of financial gain more than anything in this. Like, I hear a lot of people who make the accusation about, like, it's misogyny and all this, and it's, yes, obviously they had their opinions about women, but it didn't seem like this was done to keep women in their place. This was done to gain the accusers some kind of financial benefits. For instance, a lot more people were willing to pay their church dues once the family members of Reverend Paris started accusing, initially, people who weren't paying their dues of witchcraft. One of the first ones accused, Sarah Good, was an interesting one. Just in that, like I said, she was actually born into well-off means, but her father died. I think it was, I could be wrong, I think it was suicide if I remember correctly, and he left her in like a lot of debt. And basically, her family lost everything because they had to sell it all to pay back his debts after he died. She was, I think, in her 50s at this point, and based on some of the descriptions, I kind of think she actually suffered from mental illness. She was known to have a very violent temper, and on top of that, she would often be heard like muttering to herself kind of incoherently. When she was brought forth, her husband basically accused, like, he didn't straight up accuse her of witchcraft himself, but like he did like testify she did not perform her wifely duties well or as expected. Sarah Osborne was another interesting one in that she had actually tried to deny her sons their inheritance from her not the indentured servant she married, but she was actually married to the guy who owned his contract initially. I believe he was named Osborne as well. And then Tituba, who is the closest one, I think, to have practiced what we could call witchcraft. So, initially, when we see a lot of portrayals of Tituba, she's portrayed as like a African slave, but she actually was from either Central or South America. Initially, before we started importing mass slaves from Africa, we actually tried to enslave the local populations first. The majority of them would either die from the diseases that the colonists brought over, or they would be able to escape, and they knew the land very well and could live off the land. And that's part of the reason I think African slaves became more prominent, is because they were more hardy against the diseases that the natives were suffering from. Because, old world, they'd already been exposed to it and had an immunity, but on top of that, they didn't know the land very well. And I think Tituba practiced a native folk religion that was, I don't know if misconstrued is the right word, because I don't think they cared really to understand it, but I think that was what she was doing that got her accused of witchcraft. I think she showed rituals to the kids and stuff, because supposedly she showed, like, how to tell your fortune and a bunch of other things. On top of that, I did find a few indications that she might have only confessed and accused the other two women after Paris had, like, beaten her a little bit. But my point being, the first three women accused were essentially, I guess the best word to say it is expendable, in terms of how the town saw them. A few people, even her own husband, liked Sarah Good. Sarah Osborne was kind of looked down upon for trying to, I guess, steal her husband's inheritance. And, Tituba was a slave. She was an outsider. And, they were just easy targets. After this, they started going after people who had stuff they wanted or who they wanted to get revenge on, like George Burroughs. So the accusations kind of came in waves. After people like Burroughs were accused and executed, well, not even executed at this point, there's a lot to unpack with this stuff. That's when people like Giles and Martha Corey started getting accused. They'd actually spoken out against the trials and the accusations, and that's why Martha was so sure that people would not find her guilty, because she was like, guys, this is ludicrous, what are we doing? She thought people would just come to their senses, and unfortunately they didn't. That kind of scared them a little bit more. It didn't actually stop until the governor of the state's wife was accused, because it wasn't just people in Salem. Surrounding areas did get accused as well by the people of Salem. It wasn't until the governor's wife got accused that this stopped. So something else you might want to know about is the Glorious Revolution, and believe me, I do not have time to go into that. Anybody who knows English history can fill you in on it, but it affected the colonies. There was the governor of the Dominion of New England at the time was Edmund Andros, and he was actually ousted during this time. And there was a little bit of lawlessness. The colony's last leaders, the charter was basically vacated. So each colony had a charter, and it was vacated because the government that set it up was no longer in place, which led to a lot of the leaders, although they were still arresting people, they weren't trying them right away because they didn't think they had the authority to. So a lot of these trials happened way after the arrest, and like it was crazy. Like even a 4-year-old, I think her name was, they call her Dorothy now, but the records then called her Dorcas, which just sounds mean. Unfortunately, her and her mother were accused, and she was kind of manipulated into giving evidence against her mother, who was hanged. Dorcas, unfortunately, stayed in prison, in jail. She was eventually let out, but supposedly, like, she was insane by that point. Like, she never mentally recovered. But yeah, like I said, there was just such a political upheaval. That's partly why Salem was able to happen, because like I said, even the other areas kind of saw Salem Village as a little bit fanatical. And once the local governments got settled and the current governor's wife got accused, he was kind of like, okay, what's going on in Salem? Oh, holy crap, what have we been letting happen there? And that's kind of what put a stop to the trials. Even a few years after the trials, like the families appealed all the convictions. Like every conviction was appealed, maybe except for Tituba's, because I mean, there wasn't really. I mean, she had a husband called John Indian, but nobody was really going out of their way to save her, unfortunately. A little more about Giles Corey. So like I said, a lot of this seemed to be financially motivated. So Paris obviously wanted to make money as a minister. One of the famous judges from this was Judge Hawthorne. Personally, I don't think he really... I don't know. He, like I said earlier, religious freedom wasn't about accepting other religions. It was about securing society for your own religion. Hawthorne was actually known to have Quakers publicly whipped, and he seemed to want to be more looked at like those guys who are like, oh, we're tough on crime. Like, you ever see those judges who in the jurisdictions where they're voted into their position, and even other politicians, they want to come off as tough on crime, and that's the impression I kind of get reading about Hawthorne. But another person who financially benefited a lot from these accusations was Sheriff Corwin. This guy, frankly, was a real bastard. So like I said, when Giles wouldn't confess, he would even jump onto the boulders and the board just to try and force him to confess. And yeah, Giles' lack of confession resulted in his land not being seized. But that unfortunately did not stop Corwin. He actually then went and extorted Corey's daughter and her husband to basically give him money, or he was they were basically like he was going to get them in some way. I'm not aware if he of him threatening to accuse them, but obviously that would be an unspoken threat, even if it wasn't like explicitly said. And they were actually able to prove it because after he died, they went to court over it, and the courts wouldn't release his body to his family for burial until they paid back the money he had extorted from Corey's daughter. As far as the position being cursed, it is interesting. A lot of the sheriffs throughout history have died of heart and blood related illnesses, and either died or resigned. But what's interesting is the year the position was moved, it was held by a man named Charles Reardon. This was back in 1991. He took the position in 1978, but in 1996 he ended up having to resign because he pled guilty to corruption charges. I guess he was accused of wiretapping and embezzling. I can't say I know a lot about it right now, but so I don't know. I'm not aware of anything happening to anybody else. Kevin Coppinger is the current sheriff. He took it in 2017. Between him and Reardon were Frank Cousins Jr., who chose just not to run for re-election in after 2016. But like I said, there's just a lot to unpack with Salem. But interestingly, I kind of think it led to the Littleton accusation. So Abigail Dudley is known in Littleton to, frankly, the very few who even know about her as the White Witch of Littleton. There's a few other ghost stories that the citizens of Littleton tend to know better, but I thought Dudley's was a bit more interesting. So, like I said, she was accused in 1720, which is also the year Samuel Parris died. I forget what month she was accused in, but Parris died in February of 1720, if I remember correctly. And I know she was accused after that. And it kind of makes me wonder, to a certain point, if his death didn't kind of inspire it. So, obviously when somebody dies, like somebody famous dies, we talk about them for a bit. Recent example from modern times, recently Jessica Walters passed, and, when she passed at work, we started talking about her roles in Dinosaurs and Archer. And it makes me wonder if the Blanchard parents or friends of theirs started talking about Samuel Parris, because he would have been infamous at this time. And maybe the girls heard that and heard about the fits that the other three suffered. Interestingly enough, I believe Ann Putnam did later on apologize for the accusations to the survivors. Allegedly, they all forgave her. And there's actually a memorial now in Salem for the victims, who were actually buried in unmarked graves, so I don't know where the legend of Giles Corey's ghost walking his graveyard came from, because, again, he was buried in an unmarked grave, as far as I'm aware. Although he wasn't convicted, so it's possible he could have gotten a proper burial. I'd have to look more into that. But, I also find it weird that he'd show up whenever the city of Salem suffers a tragedy, because again, he was in Salem Village, which is actually now owned by Danvers, Massachusetts. Despite their embracing of the witch stuff in the present, at the time, they were kind of horrified by it all, so they basically were like, here, Danvers, you take them. But back to my point about the girls, the three Blanchard girls, I wonder if hearing about Samuel Parris and all that stuff kind of like made them think it was like a fun game, or just, I don't know, something, which caused it. The town government was horrified by this. They did not want to go through with this. They were trying to figure out how they were going to shut that shit down. And unfortunately probably felt very relieved when Abigail Dudley died, because it now meant they didn't have to go through with a trial. In Medford, the new church minister for the Blanchard family, I want to say maybe 10 years or 9 years later, something like that, supposedly he came out and said that the girls had told him, like, it wasn't true, and that the girls were just making it up or playing a game or something. Because by this time, the local governments were more established, so people like the ones in Salem couldn't just get away willy-nilly with what they were doing. And, they just didn't want the chaos that came from that kind of mass hysteria. And with that, we are going to take a little break.